Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me for my review of the 1978 classic horror film Halloween, directed by John Carpenter and starring Donald Pleasance and Jamie Lee Curtis. Now, Halloween is a film I've seen a few times before, and I've always thought it was a solid film. I don't quite think it's one of the all-time greatest horror films like some people do, but I can understand why it's considered a classic, and there's no doubt it's one of the most influential slasher films, and you could argue one of the most influential horror films, period. And there's a lot of reasons for that, which I'll get into. One of the things I've always respected about Halloween is that it's proof that you can make a film and still make an excellent film without a $100 million budget. One of the great things about horror films in general is that if you have a director and actors who are committed to a project and know what they're doing, you can make an excellent horror film and not spend a ton of money. And Halloween is a good example of that. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Director John Carpenter creates a great mood and atmosphere in this film. One of the things he does that I really like a lot is that Michael Myers, who's definitely an iconic horror film character, isn't really in that many scenes in the film, but he feels like he's in almost every scene of the film by the way that John Carpenter made this movie. His presence definitely kind of is in every scene. Also, Dr. Loomis and Laurie Strode are very memorable horror film characters, and that's mostly due to the acting of Donald Pleasance and Jamie Lee Curtis. The score, which was also created by John Carpenter, is also very memorable, and the film is very visually well done. There's a lot of nice and interesting scenes in the film in that regard. And also, something that's got to be talked about in a slasher film, the kill scenes are built up very well. They're not overly long, but they're just long enough to build up tension, and they're eerie and effective. They're not really gory. There's not any gore in Halloween, or very little gore, but the scenes have a lot of tension, and you could tell that director John Carpenter really knew what he was doing in this regard as well. So overall, Halloween does a lot of good things that are essential to a good slasher film. Unfortunately, this film also has a couple of the problems that seem to plague a lot of slasher films. Now, Halloween, you can kind of forgive it because it was one of the earlier slasher films made, and some of the cliches and things that are in this film, Halloween helped create. It didn't necessarily copy, but in my opinion, the flaws are still there. The first problem with this film is that the plot is very, very simple to a point where this is like a 90-minute film and there's really only about 60 minutes of plot in it. And there are more creative slashers. There's no twists or anything in this film. It's just a very straightforward slasher plot, although done well, admittedly. Some of the dialogue's kind of in the so-so range, too. I definitely don't think the dialogue was the main focus when this film was made. My bigger issue with Halloween, and this is something that hurts the film more in my opinion, is that some of the supporting characters, actually all of the supporting characters, are very interchangeable with characters from probably 20 other slasher films. They're just not that interesting. And if you cared about the supporting characters more, I feel the film would be more effective. I feel like we care about what happens to these characters because of some of the situations and build up and tension in the film, not really because they themselves are anything that special. And some of the scenes they're in just aren't that interesting. And actually, that kind of makes the middle of the film lag slightly, in my opinion. Like I said, this film's only 90 minutes, but most of the interesting things, the setups at the beginning of the film and the climax is very solid and holds up well, even though there's a lot of cliches in it. But the climax of the film is really well done. But about the middle, like 40 minutes or so of this film, it's not terribly paced, but not a lot really happens when I went back and watched this movie again. Um, in that regard, and that kind of hurts the film for me as well. But overall, there's no doubt that Halloween is a classic. It's a very influential film, and like I said, shows what you can do without a huge budget. And I definitely recommend Halloween to horror fans to watch this one at least once. And I'm going to give Halloween a 4 out of 5. Like I said, this is a must-see in my opinion for horror fans, and definitely a must-see for slasher fans. But just people who like to see classic films in general, I think Halloween is worth a one-time watch. So, 4 out of 5 for Halloween. And as always, thank you very much for watching.